Halo 2 is considered by many to have the best story in the Halo series, but how are the levels themselves? In this video we will evaluate all 13 missions of Halo 2 to see which are the best and worst. While Halo Combat Evolved featured a much more open level design, Halo 2 is a much more linear game. To be fair to Halo 2, we will not compare its level design to Halo CE. Instead, we will simply compare the levels within the game to each other. We will use the following criteria to evaluate the levels. 1. Story. How does this mission move the plot forward? How good are the cutscenes at the beginning and end of the mission? What are the best set pieces and character moments throughout the level? 2. Tone and atmosphere. How does the environment contribute to the feel of the mission? How does the soundtrack contribute? What environmental storytelling exists in the mission? 3. Level design and fun factor. How is the level structured? What enemies, allies, weapons, and vehicles are present in the mission? How fun is the mission to play? 4. Replay value. Is this mission fun to play multiple times? Are there multiple viable options for approaching enemy encounters? What memorable moments are there in the level? We will be skipping the first two missions, the Heretic and the Armory, because they are essentially cutscenes, and will progress chronologically, beginning with the first real mission, Cairo Station. The opening cinematic of Cairo Station shows the Master Chief and Sergeant Johnson receiving awards for their actions in the first game, which makes the player feel like they are being rewarded. We're introduced to Commander Miranda Keyes, the daughter of Jacob Keyes from Halo 1, who receives a medal on his behalf. This scene is juxtaposed with the punishment of the elite commander who led the forces you fought in Halo 1. The Covenant society is more fleshed out, and the player may even start to feel bad for the elite. Returning to the Cairo Station, we're told that a Covenant fleet is approaching Earth, the worst case scenario. However, we're told that something's not right. The fleet that destroyed Reach was 50 times this size. This provides some intrigue and mystery while raising the stakes, mirroring the feelings we had in the beginning of Halo CE. The plot of this mission centers around defending the Cairo Station from a surprise invasion. The tone of this level reinforces the sense of heroism in the player, the idea that the entire Earth is dependent on us to save them. We see other stations blown up by the Covenant, and Cortana remarks that they must be bringing bombs with them. Therefore, we must find the bomb on board the Cairo Station. Throughout the level, we save groups of Marines and officers from the invading Covenant. The giant MAC cannon can be seen firing into space, and it's really cool how the level geometry moves with the cannon firing. Once the player reaches the last room with the bomb, a pulsing beat raises the intensity. Finally, we have that amazing ending cutscene, one of the most memorable moments in the entire Halo series. The music, the visuals, the intensity, and Sergeant Johnson bringing the comic relief really shows off the impressive story direction of Halo 2. This level really sets the stage well for an epic adventure and hooks the player right from the start. Much like in Halo CE, this first level features mainly indoor areas and smaller spaces to acquaint the player with the basics of combat. Right at the beginning, we're introduced to one of the best features of Halo 2, dual wielding. We're also introduced to the battle rifle, a crucial component of the Halo 2 sandbox and the replacement for the pistol from Halo 1. In the next rooms, the player fights against grunts and elites, like in Halo 1, but we're also introduced to drones, one of the new enemies in Halo 2. The drones change up Covenant encounters by flying around the area, harassing the player from above. They are a welcome, if somewhat annoying, addition to the enemy roster. In addition to the basic grunts and elites, we're also introduced to the jetpack elites and stealth elites as well. Unlike the Pillar of Autumn in Halo CE, this level allows the player to go out into space and fight in a low-gravity environment, a really cool and underutilized feature of this game. The aforementioned MAC cannon section is really unique and impressive that Bungie were able to pull this off on the original Xbox in 2004. The level design in this first mission is well done. The first mission is a blast to play and a great intro to the game. It doesn't throw too much at you, but it does have more variety than the first level of Combat Evolved had. It's fun to replay as well, but doesn't offer many different paths for completing the level. In Combat Evolved, the end of the mission featured multiple viable paths, but this level is much more linear. That being said, there is a wider variety of weapons available to the player, which allows for more creativity in the basic combat throughout the mission. Overall, Cairo Station belongs in the A tier. It's an explosive start to the game that introduces several new weapons, mechanics, and enemies to the player. Although it's fairly linear, it's a great introduction to the game, and the cutscenes do a great job of hyping up the player. This is a strong start for Halo 2. Level 2, Outskirts. This mission opens with a cutscene in which the objective is to capture or kill the Prophet of Regret. However, we're interrupted by a scarab that derails the mission. The remainder of this level's story involves regrouping with Marines while progressing towards the Prophet of Regret's location. It's a fairly simple story, but it doesn't need to be too complex, we're still just getting started. The tone of this level is intense and chaotic. At the beginning, you gather the survivors of your Pelican crash and try to gain a foothold in the war-torn city occupied by the Covenant. You're surrounded on all sides, but this is human territory, and Sergeant Johnson's confidence inspires the player to stay focused. The music is intense, and percussive beats are maintained throughout the mission, keeping the player moving. The environments shift throughout the level as well, progressing from crowded city streets to the beach to an underground tunnel. The variety keeps things interesting throughout this mission. Outskirts level design is fantastic. The opening section can be completely skipped by climbing on the rooftops and pulling off some grenade jumps, but more on that soon. The sense of progression felt by the player is due to the constantly changing environments, with each area ramping up in intensity. The first area features standard Covenant troops and a defense section, but then hunters are introduced. After defeating them, the chief fights through the city and the Hotel Zanzibar, arriving at a beach where vehicles are reintroduced. The player has the choice of taking a Warthog or a Ghost throughout the rest of the mission. The beach sections are meant for vehicle combat, but if your vehicle is destroyed, you can occupy the small buildings dotting the beach and find some hidden weapon stashes. In fact, there are several areas in this level with hidden weapon stashes, including a hidden sniper rifle here. These weapon stashes are found throughout Halo 2, making it worth your while to explore to find the items. Yes, the sniper alley is extremely frustrating on higher difficulties, but the player has options for how to approach the encounter. This mission is an excellent example of Halo's level design done right. There are so many fun elements to this mission: sniping enemies from range, using turrets to mow down enemies in the first section, driving a Warthog full of Marines, and speeding down the tunnel at the end are all highlights. This mission is simply a blast. It's also one of the most replayable levels in the game. Unlike many other games that put invisible barriers around the map to funnel the player into linear progression, this level is totally open and you can explore it however you want. Just follow this path here, and you can skip the entire on-foot section of the mission. I like to play Outskirts normally, then use these boxes in Sniper Alley to get on the rooftops. The vehicle section can be entirely skipped as well, or played normally in multiple different ways. The options available to the player make this one of the best levels in Halo 2. Overall, this level is the first S-tier experience in Halo 2. The open level design in Outskirts, coupled with the slowly increasing intensity of the fighting, make this mission a blast to play through each time. One of the best missions in Halo 2. Level 3, Metropolis. Metropolis follows the first two action-packed missions with another amazing level, this time with more vehicles. The opening cutscene shows the main target of the mission, the Scarab that destroyed your ship at the beginning of the previous level. Sergeant Johnson arrives, delivering a much welcomed Scorpion tank to the player and providing an inspirational speech that gets you hyped to play this mission. You chase the Scarab to the city center of New Mombasa, and in the climax of the mission you board the tank itself. At the end of the mission, the Prophet of Regret realizes he's screwed up by coming to Earth with a small fleet, and so he flees the city, leaving massive destruction in his wake while we follow close behind. The tone and atmosphere of this mission can be summarized by Johnson's speech at the beginning of the level. The Chief is going to lay waste to the Covenant, so come along for the ride. Like the previous mission, this level is paced excellently, increasing in intensity as the player progresses. The music in this mission is heart-pumping and spikes the adrenaline of the player. What else can be said? It's a blast. Metropolis is much more linear than Outskirts, but what it lacks in expansive design, it makes up for in memorable set pieces. Everyone remembers driving the tank down the bridge, laying waste to the Covenant, and who could possibly forget the amazing ending where you board a Scarab and destroy its inhabitants? A wide variety of weapons are available to the player, including every human weapon in the game, and we get introduced to the amazing Gauss Warthog, a fan favorite. The Scorpion tank is much more fun to drive than in Combat Evolved, and it's much more accurate as well. The Jackal snipers in the second outdoor section can be frustrating, but that's the only negative thing I can think of from this mission. This is one of the most fun missions in Halo 2. This game starts off really strong, and Metropolis is the climax of that amazing opening. One of the best missions in Halo 2, and one of the most memorable in the entire series of Halo games. Metropolis is also an extremely replayable level. At the start, the player has the option of taking the Scorpion tank or using the Warthog. In the second area, the player can choose to drive the Gauss Warthog or use the gun itself and allow the AI to drive, although the AI's driving is pretty bad in Halo 2. Finally, during the Scarab encounter, every human weapon is available to the player. You can choose your loadout, then jump aboard the Covenant vehicle and unleash carnage. From start to finish, the player has lots of choice for how to approach the mission. There's also the Scarab gun Easter egg for those who like a challenge, so this mission offers plenty of reasons to replay. Overall, Metropolis is another of the finest missions in Halo 2, deserving its place in S tier. It's a thrilling conclusion to Act 1 of the game, and sets the stage well for the next Chief-centered mission. The abundance of weapons and vehicles, coupled with the great set pieces, make this one of the best missions in the Halo series. Level 4, the Arbiter. The opening cutscene of this mission takes several minutes to establish the Arbiter's story. The disgraced commander of the Covenant forces in Halo 1 is brought before the Prophets to take on a new role, that of the Arbiter. As the Arbiter, he will undertake perilous missions that will eventually fulfill his death sentence. His first mission as the Arbiter is to locate and execute the Heretic, an elite who learn the truth about the Foreigners and threatens to upend the Covenant hierarchy. The ride in the Phantom provides so much insight into the way the Covenant operate. The player understands that elites have a warrior code that binds them as a unit. The player also empathizes with the Covenant before it's suddenly revealed that we're actually playing as the Arbiter. This mission's story is simple. We're on a chase to locate the Heretic. The setting of the Arbiter is incredible. We're on a Forerunner mining platform floating inside a gas giant. The orange clouds and the swirling storm in the distance are iconic images that the player will forever associate with this level. The music sounds alien as we descend into the facility, creating a slightly unsettling atmosphere, which foreshadows the events of the next mission. The inside areas are less impressive than the outside, but the player gets plenty of time in the last part of the mission to appreciate their place among the clouds. The level design of this mission is pretty good. Fighting the Covenant heretics isn't different enough from fighting the regular Covenant, and given how jarring the transition to playing as the Arbiter was, it's easy for players to mistake their allies as enemies. As frustrating as this can be early on, the player does get introduced to some new weapons: the Energy Sword, Covenant Carbine, Fuel Rod Gun, and Sentinel Beam. The Sword, Fuel Rod, and Sentinel Beam were all featured in Combat Evolved, but the player never got the opportunity to use them, so being able to use them now is a nice feature. The Carbine is a welcome addition as well, quickly becoming a staple of the Halo 2 sandbox and absolutely necessary on the higher difficulties. Furthermore, the player is introduced to the Arbiter's unique ability. Instead of a flashlight, the Arbiter gets a temporary active camouflage power-up. This ability is extremely useful in all of the Arbiter missions, and it differentiates the gameplay from the sections where you play as the Master Chief. The new weapons and the camo ability are great, and the level design is fairly varied. The indoor sections do get pretty repetitive, but the last section of this mission is fun. It's one of the only sections in the game centered around aerial combat, and flying the Banshee around the clouds of the gas giant is very memorable. The Arbiter is fun to replay because his active camo ability allows for creativity in the player's approach to on-foot encounters. You can charge into enemy forces head-on or decide to play the stealth game and sneak around them for a quick backsmack. The interior section is somewhat repetitive and can be boring, however the last section of the Banshee is very replayable because if the player knows where to go, they can skip most of the search for the Heretic and go right to his hiding spot. Overall, the Arbiter is going in the B tier. I considered putting this mission in C because it doesn't stand out in my mind as a terrible or a great mission, but all the new features introduced in this mission make it a great first-time experience. Furthermore, it does allow for some player creativity, so I think that's enough to bump it up to B tier. Where would you put the Arbiter in your rankings? Let me know, I'm curious. Level 5, the Oracle. The story of the Oracle is about chasing the Heretic down and defeating him. In his attempt to hide from the Arbiter and his forces, the Heretic unwittingly unleashes the Flood, making the situation worse. When we corner the Heretic, he activates a shield, preventing us from reaching him. This forces us to cut the cable holding up the station, forcing him out of hiding and accelerating the tension as the station falls. After another chase, the Arbiter finally catches up to the Heretic. It's revealed that the Heretic learned about the lies of the Prophets after speaking to 343 Guilty Spark, who survived the destruction of Installation 04. Unfortunately, before Arbiter can ask Spark any questions, the Heretic decides to fire at the Arbiter. Why didn't the Heretic just let the Arbiter ask Spark about Halo? If you think about it, that cutscene doesn't make a ton of sense. After defeating the Heretic, Brute Chieftain Tartarus picks up the Arbiter and Guilty Spark, taking them both to High Charity. The story of this mission is pretty interesting and keeps a lively pace. The tone of the Oracle is dark from the beginning. In the first room, attentive players can spot flood spores floating in a storage tank, foreshadowing their appearance in the next rooms. In the second room, the player can hear Flood and Heretic forces fighting each other. This is one of the few times where I prefer the classic graphics to the remastered. In the remastered version, the player can clearly see the Flood through the glass floor. However, in the classic graphics, it's left a little more ambiguous, keeping the mystery alive for another minute. The chase for the Heretic through the Flood forces is dark and spooky, but the highlight of this mission for me is when you cut the cable holding up the station. The station lists to the side as the cable is cut, and when the station finally falls, it's a shocking moment for the player, a truly memorable set piece that sticks with you. The tone of the level gets more desperate in the last section before the boss fight. The lights have turned red instead of yellow, and the interior of the station is much darker. Overall, the tone of this mission is actually pretty well done. Although the story and tone of this level are interesting, the level design is one of the worst in the game. After the intense opening and the introduction of the Flood, the player is forced to sit through 2 rooms that take way too much time. The first is this elevator, which moves incredibly slowly and forces the player to sit and wait for Flood and Sentinels to show up. Trying to keep your Covenant allies alive can be fun, but other than that, I strongly dislike this elevator. After this incredibly boring section, the player enters another room where you can't do anything but wait and fight the Flood until the door opens. Halo 2 has several areas like this throughout the game, and they're my least favorite parts. The fact that 2 defense rooms exist in this level back to back totally kills the pacing of the mission. Cutting the cable is fun, but the section after that is pretty boring. You fight your way through recycled rooms from the previous mission, and although the tone is different this time, it's not as fun as in the previous mission. The final boss fight is also somewhat underwhelming. The dual plasma rifles held by the Heretic and his hologram clones can kill the player extremely quickly, so the best strategy is to go straight for the real Heretic and slice him with your sword until he's dead. I don't enjoy this fight very much. It doesn't have anything really unique about it, just killing a flying elite with your sword, then it's over. The pacing of this mission is frustrating and the payoff at the end isn't very rewarding. The Oracle is one of the missions that I least look forward to when running through Halo 2. The linearity of this mission doesn't allow for much variety. Using the sword is always the best strategy for fighting the Flood since it destroys their bodies, preventing reanimation from infection forms. So fighting the Flood can get pretty repetitive. Definitely not one of the best missions in Halo 2. At least you can use the active camo power-up to speed through parts of it. Overall, the Oracle is the first F-tier mission in Halo 2. This mission could have been so much better if they'd cut the elevator and room defense sections, but those rooms break the pacing of the mission, and the rest feels like a slog to get through. The boss fight isn't very entertaining, and this mission leaves a sour note in my mouth. I usually end up pausing a run of Halo 2 after this mission because it leaves me wanting to take a break. Level 6, Delta Halo. This mission returns the focus back to the Master Chief. We follow the Prophet of Regret through the portal he opened in New Mombasa, and we find ourselves in a similar situation as in the beginning of Halo 1. We're floating in an uncharted region of space and looking at a new Halo ring. Sergeant Johnson's reaction to learning that there's another ring is so good. Commander Keyes wastes no time, ordering Cortana to give her all the information on the first Halo. The plot of this mission is about the Chief leading a group of ODSTs to secure a landing zone on the ring to follow the Prophet and find out why he came here. The hard landing on the ring is exciting, and as Chief grabs a rocket launcher from his pod, the player knows they're in for a fun level. Similar to the second mission in Combat Evolved, the tone of this mission creates some mystery and wonder as the player finds themselves in another beautiful location. The adventure has begun, and the attitude of the Marines throughout the mission is great. The music here is some of the best in Halo 2, and it pushes the player to keep exploring this vast land. After the previous mission, this one is a breath of fresh air. Although it is still fairly linear, it's much more expansive, and it allows for more player creativity. The opening section can be completely skipped if you want, but I usually enjoy holding out with the ODSTs to wait for a Warthog. There are hidden weapons on the roof of the big structure, and there are several crashed pods with weapons scattered around for the player to experiment with. I don't know why, but I love the second area. The room where you extend the bridge has such a cool design, and I love that there are wraiths flinging energy balls at you from across the chasm. The player gets access to a tank, which is always a blast, and you proceed through the ancient Forerunner structures in the jungle to arrive at another ancient structure where the Covenant are maintaining a tight grip. Just outside of this structure, there's a secret weapon stash containing a couple of energy swords alongside some dead grunts. What happened here? Pelican dropships supply you with fresh troops and a variety of weapons to choose from. Fighting into the structure, the player enters a larger forest area, so pretty that Cortana even comments on it. This area is fun to fight in as well, except the Jackal snipers, of course. Finally, the player crosses a bridge to a room where you fight honor guards for the first time. This is an intense fight for new players, but I know how to handle those elites. The pacing of this mission is well done, and there are many choices for how to approach this mission. This is a fun level to replay. Speedrunners can skip most of the mission if they want, but I really enjoy the variety on display in the combat at this level. You can choose to take the Scorpion or Warthog, or steal a Ghost or Wraith and use the Covenant's vehicles against them. The drop pods containing weapons allow for a different playstyle each time, and there are 3 areas in this mission that have them. The variety in this mission is great, and it shows off many of the best things Halo 2 has to offer. Overall, at first I wanted to put this mission in A tier because I wasn't sure that I enjoyed it as much as I did the missions on Earth. But after thinking about it some more, I think it does deserve S tier. The opening cutscene hypes you up, and the atmosphere of this level is stunning. The sheer variety of gameplay choices in this level make it one of the best for replaying, and it's entertaining from start to finish. Where would you rank Delta Halo in your list? Let me know what you think. Level 7, Regret. In the opening cutscene, we learn that the Prophet of Regret plans to activate Halo as part of their religion. It's clear that we must stop him. Fortunately, Commander Keyes volunteers to go secure the Index, sparing us from reliving the library from Combat Evolved, and she gives us the objective of taking out the Prophet. During the level, we discover that the Prophet of Truth is upset with Regret for attacking Earth on his own, while Regret argues that no human presence was anticipated, suggesting that the Prophets had other reasons for coming to Earth. Either way, the Prophet of Truth won't mind the removal of Regret, adding an element of political intrigue to the story. As we reach the Prophet of Regret, the Covenant Holy City High Charity and a massive fleet arrive to try to stop us, to no avail. The Prophet is executed, and the Chief narrowly escapes a Covenant ship's plasma beam. He falls into the water and is pulled downward by mysterious tentacles. This mission's story is exciting, climactic, and ends on a cliffhanger. The atmosphere of this mission is similar to Delta Halo, but this mission's underwater sections are the most memorable. The music which plays as we explore ancient underwater ruins instills a feeling of mystery in the player. While the story, tone, and atmosphere of this mission is well done, the level design itself is hit or miss. The beginning and middle of this mission feature way too many sniper jackals, making this mission frustrating on higher difficulties. The gondola rides are too long and feature a bunch of waiting around, which I'm not a fan of. Fighting in the underwater sections is cool and memorable, especially fighting invisible grunts for the first time. The last outdoor fight before the final gondola ride is well done, and there are several weapon pods for you to choose your arsenal for the final fight. The boss fight with the Prophet is pretty underwhelming. It simply consists of the player rushing to the Prophet, hijacking his chair, and beating him while he's defenseless. The challenge in this part comes from avoiding the honor guards that rush you when the Prophet teleports. This fight is a little too easy even on Heroic. It only takes a couple attempts to defeat the Prophet, and the Covenant forces don't shoot at you while you're punching him. Furthermore, once he's dead, the Covenant all just stop fighting you and run away. This mission's pacing is a little off and ends on a somewhat disappointing note. Regret doesn't offer a ton of replay value, to be honest. The gondola rides and underwater section, while entertaining on a first playthrough, break up the pacing too much on repeat playthroughs. There's some choice in the final section, as you can choose your weapons to take with you to the end, but most of this mission is a very linear affair. I enjoy replaying the previous mission much more than I do this one. Overall, Regret is our first C-tier mission. The story, tone, and atmosphere are well done, and it has some fun fights throughout, but the slow pace of the gondolas and underwater elevators make it a slog on repeat playthroughs, and the final fight is somewhat underwhelming. I'm comfortable putting this mission in C tier. What do you think? Level 8, Sacred Icon. This mission's opening cutscene begins in High Charity with some shots of brutes replacing the elites as the honor guards of the Prophets. We turn to a discussion between the Prophet of Truth and the elite Spec Ops commander, who is disappointed that their traditional role as protectors of the Prophets is being changed. The Arbiter arrives as the elite is waved away by the Prophets. We learn that the Covenant believe activating the Halo rings will lead them to eternal salvation. After the Prophet's Truth and Mercy spoke with 343 Guilty Spark, they learn that the Index, or Sacred Icon, is required to activate Halo, so the Arbiter is given the task of retrieving the Sacred Icon for the Prophets. We take a ride in a Phantom filled with brutes, their cold, quiet nature contrasting with the inspirational speech by the elites in the earlier mission. We are dropped off and the Phantom is attacked by a massive Enforcer Sentinel, foreshadowing our fight with one later in the mission. The opening cutscene establishes this mission well, but not much happens of plot relevance in the mission itself. We unlock the shield wall protecting the library, and make our way down the Sentinel wall to the valley floor. Sacred Icon's tone and atmosphere is creepy. Corpses of Covenant troops litter the Foreigner facility as we make our way to the Sentinel wall. After defeating the Enforcer, we're treated to a beautiful scene as the shield wall is lowered. Beauty doesn't last, however, as the reason for the shield wall becomes apparent. Flood come crawling out of the facility to fight us. As we descend the Sentinel wall, the atmosphere becomes thick with flood spores and the music becomes dark and moody. We can spot humans fighting the flood just out of reach. As we near the bottom, our main objective comes into view. The library acts as a glowing beacon in the distance, guiding our approach. The outside section at the end of the level is a breath of fresh air as we leave the claustrophobic interior to engage the hordes of flood waiting outside. Meeting up with elite troops provides the player with some relief before the level ends. While I enjoy the dark and creepy tone of this mission, the level design is not great. The Foreigner facility is filled with repetitive rooms, and the only enemies you face are Sentinels in the flood. The introduction of Golden Sentinels with their more powerful beam, and the Sentinel Enforcer are cool additions to the enemy roster, but they don't get used often in this game. Instead, the player fights their way through horde after horde of flood, and this mission feels like it takes forever. Shooting the stacks to open paths below and falling down the chutes in the Sentinel wall are unique and interesting moments, but it's not enough to distract from the frustration of fighting the flood in this mission. The human combat forms in particular are a nuisance because they can outrun the player and often carry shotguns which can one-hit the player at close range. This room in particular was frustrating to play through, and I ended up just using active camo to get past most of the flood. I usually play through this mission as quickly as possible to make it through to the end. Ending the mission on a holdout section is pretty lame too. Holding out in an area fighting an arbitrary number of flood until the mission ends is not a great finale. This is another level that I don't enjoy replaying. The Sentinel Enforcer fights are fun, but most of the mission can be skipped, and that's usually what I choose to do. Thank goodness for the Arbiter's active camo ability. Overall, Sacred Icon belongs in F tier. Between the Oracle's terrible pacing and this mission's frustrating and claustrophobic design, I don't know which is my least favorite. This part is a definitive low point in any playthrough of Halo 2 for me. Am I being too harsh on this mission? Or does everyone else hate this level as much as I do? Let me know what you think in the comments. Level 9, Quarantine Zone. This mission begins simply with a rousing speech from the elite Spec Ops commander. The story of this mission is pretty simple. Make your way to the library and get to the Index. When you reach a gondola near the end of the mission, the Spec Ops commander stays behind to watch your back, while Tartarus follows in a Phantom to cover you. Upon reaching the Index, the Arbiter engages in hand-to-hand combat with Sergeant Johnson and Commander Keyes, who got there first. He's joined quickly by Tartarus, who takes the Index for himself. When the Arbiter protests, the Brute Chieftain informs him that the Prophets have ordered him to execute the Arbiter and other elites. Tartarus launches the Arbiter into an abyss, and the mission ends on a cliffhanger. The story of this mission is simple at first, but ends on a fantastic twist that leaves the player wondering what will happen next. The wind howls and snowfall blankets the night as you fight your way through the flood hordes to reach the library. In the first major battle, an epic guitar solo blasts as you tear the flood apart. The battlefield is strewn with massive pieces of battered architecture from an ancient war. Fires light up the night. When you finally reach the library, it's eerily quiet. Human corpses litter the ground, foreshadowing the events of the last cutscene. The tone and atmosphere of this mission is pretty well done. This is a vehicle-heavy mission, and right at the beginning you're given an opportunity to pilot a new vehicle, the Spectre. It's a Covenant equivalent to the Warthog, with an extra passenger seat. Against the Sentinel forces you face in the beginning, it's very effective, but it's less effective against the Flood, which, for the first time, are commandeering vehicles. Lucky players will have the opportunity to steal a Scorpion tank from the Flood, and use it to make short work of the vast numbers of Sentinel Enforcers and Flood-controlled Wraiths and Warthogs. This vehicle section is punctuated by these short indoor sections that break up the pace, but I don't really care for them. Fighting so many Flood in such a small space isn't my favorite, and I find myself using the active camo ability to sneak past most of the Flood in these areas to get back to a vehicle. Furthermore, the last section of this mission is even worse. You're forced to ride another gondola, the longest one in the game, with very few checkpoints. So if you get overwhelmed by the Flood and die, you have to repeat the whole thing again. Your elite allies usually fall quickly, so I like to equip them with energy swords to make them somewhat more useful in combat. It doesn't change the fact that this section is pretty boring, as you're expected to hold still and wait yet again for the enemy to come to you. This last section is one of my least favorite parts of the whole campaign. This is not one of my favorite missions to replay either. The vehicle section can be interesting to change up your strategy by using a different vehicle, but ultimately fighting the Flood is pretty monotonous. The ending section alone makes me dread replaying this mission. The ending cutscene is a nice reward for completing this slog, but it's still a slog to play through. Overall, Quarantine Zone is going in the D tier. It could have been a much more interesting mission, but it feels like it was shoehorned in by Bungie to pad out the length of this portion of the campaign. It's a shame that the first few Arbiter missions aren't very fun to play, because his story is really interesting, but it's going to get better from here. Level 10, Gravemind. The opening cutscene of this mission is the most shocking, and maybe the most important moment of the campaign. Our perspective shifts back to the Master Chief, who has been dragged by those mysterious tentacles to a dark cavern below the library. Here we meet the Gravemind, the hive mind center of the Flood. This horrifying creature tells us that it's a monument to all our sins, and we see that he's captured the Arbiter too. Finally, these two epic protagonist stories collide. The Gravemind tells the Arbiter about the threat that the rings pose to life in the galaxy, but the Arbiter is hesitant to listen. So the Gravemind brings in the infected Prophet of Regret and 2401 Penitent Tangent, the monitor of this Halo ring, to confirm the purpose of the ring. The Gravemind then gives the Chief and Arbiter a mission: locate the Index and stop the firing of the Halo. Our interests align with the horrific monster, and we don't have much choice but to listen. So he uses Halo's teleportation grid to send the Chief and Arbiter to two likely locations where the Index can be found. The scene cuts to High Charity, where riots and panic have taken hold as a result of the outbreak of the Flood. The Prophet of Truth addresses the Covenant, comforting them in the thought that the Index has been found, and now they can begin their great journey. However, the Chief arrives just then, interrupting the Prophets. The mission opens with a fight in the Council Chamber, and the story of this mission involves the Chief pursuing the Prophet of Truth through High Charity. All the while, the Covenant civil war breaks out, elites fighting the brutes. During the mission, we see the In Amber Clad crash inside of High Charity, but no response from the comms. Later we learn that Flood are leaving the wreckage. Things are about to go from bad to worse. In the ending cutscene, the Prophet of Truth delegates the task of activating the Halo Ring to Brute Chieftain Tartarus just before the Flood attack. The Brute stops most of the infection forms, but one of them latches onto the Prophet of Mercy. Rather than save him, Truth tells Tartarus to leave him, saying that the great journey waits from no one. The power struggle is complete, and now Truth is in charge of the entire Covenant on his own. This mission's atmosphere is amazing. The player has never been in such a vast Covenant territory, and fighting through High Charity is a new and memorable experience. We hear the announcements of Truth and Brute commanders as they try to hold the Covenant together. We fight through several areas seen in previous cutscenes, including the place where the Arbiter is tortured, the mausoleum of the Arbiter, and the jail cells. The music in the last fight of this mission is amazing, and it pumps you up to engage in the spectacle that is the multi-faction fighting. The tone and atmosphere of this mission is great, and although some areas are clearly reused, there is enough variety to keep things interesting. The opening of this mission is very difficult. You only have access to a Needler, although dual-wielding it can be very powerful. You are introduced to a new enemy for the first time, the Brutes. They don't have shields, but the last one in a pack will always drop his weapon and charge at the player, and God help you if he's able to get close. The best options for fighting the Brutes are headshots, sticky grenades, and Needler Super Combine explosions. This mission is very linear, and some of the areas are reused multiple times, but the multi-faction battles and variety of Covenant weapons available to the player make things interesting. Speaking of Covenant weapons, we're introduced to a new weapon in this mission, the Brute Shot. This is one of my favorite weapons in Halo 2 because it deals explosive damage, but also because the blade on the end of the weapon actually does more melee damage than other weapons. Back to the level design, the multi-faction battles are always a treat to engage in or watch, and on higher difficulties, I usually let the enemies fight each other and pick off the stragglers. Rescuing the Marines in the brig is fun, and it's great to see how far you can bring them with you. Gravemind's a fun mission to replay because of the variety available to the player. There are no human weapons, which makes sense in a Covenant city, but all the Covenant weapons are available in this mission, and there are several areas with multiple ways to approach each encounter. This isn't my favorite mission in the game, but I do enjoy it in my playthroughs of Halo 2. Overall, Gravemind is going in the B tier. If it weren't for the repetitive room layout and long length of this mission, I'd consider putting it higher, but it's a little too long for my taste. The combat in this mission is fun, but it drags on for too long. Near the end of the mission, I find myself rushing to get to the end. Would you rank Gravemind higher or lower? Let me know in the comments. Level 11, Uprising. The story in this mission is pretty simple. The Arbiter appears near the control room of the Halo Ring, picks up a plasma rifle, and proceeds to look for the Index, which he knows is in Tartarus' hands. The real storytelling of this mission is done through the environment in the first part of the level. Elite corpses litter the forested environment, and one dying elite speaks to us in the very beginning of the mission, but it's easy to miss. When reinforcements arrive, one elite comments on their betrayal by the Brutes.
They had shed our brother's blood, and for that they must die.
Hell yeah, buddy, let's go get them. We fight our way through a Brute army until at the end of the mission, the Arbiter is reunited with the elite Spec Ops commander, and they share a disdain for the Brutes. The tone of this mission is solemn in the beginning. A beautiful, sad choir sings the laments of the elite's betrayal. However, as the player regroups with more elites and they lead an uprising against the Brutes, the tone shifts back to the classic Halo badassery. The forested environment is beautiful to fight in, and the first area is absolutely gorgeous. The environmental storytelling here is great. This mission does in-game storytelling better than many other levels in Halo 2 that rely on the cutscenes to convey the story. You start off alone, facing Brutes that are stronger than you and with more powerful weapons. However, this mission features a swift progression that ends with you leading a small army of elites and grunts in a rebellion against the Brutes. The vehicle section is fun to blast through. I love boosting the Ghost down the ravine without a care for the enemies. The indoor sections are a blast too, and this one near the end is great. You defeat a large group of Brutes, then come upon a room with a small arsenal at your disposal. It's placed so well too because just outside there are multiple enemy wraiths and lots of Brutes and Jackal snipers to deal with. So grab the rocket launcher and fuel rod and blast away. I love this mission, although it is a little too short. Uprising is always a blast to play through again, and speedrunners love this mission because they can complete it in less than a minute thanks to Halo 2's lack of invisible barriers. I personally love the fast pace of the mission and the sense of power progression the player feels. The last fight offers so much choice that I always look forward to it. I'd be happy to play this mission again anytime. Overall, Uprising belongs in A tier. Although I love this mission, it is pretty linear and it's a little too short in my opinion. If it was longer, had more open environments, and featured more rooms like the arsenal at the end, I might have put it in S tier, but I think it's definitely deserving of A tier. Do you like Uprising as much as I do? Let me know what you think. Level 12, High Charity. This mission's opening cutscene shows the Master Chief asking the dying Prophet of Mercy where Truth is going. Mercy tells him that Truth is going back to Earth to finish what they started. Chief pulls the infection form off the Prophet, letting him die as Cortana tells him that the structure in the center of the city is actually a foreigner ship, and that Truth is heading there to lead the Covenant fleet to Earth. The Chief has to stop him, but Cortana decides to stay behind in case Tartarus succeeds in activating the Halo Ring. A brief moment of silence between the two characters is interrupted by a crashing pelican filled with flood. No time to waste. The Chief progresses through High Charity towards the Prophet as the city succumbs to the flood, and when he eventually makes it on board the foreigner ship, he promises to come back for Cortana. She watches as the foreigner ship leaves High Charity, disappearing into a slipspace portal. The tone and atmosphere of this mission is dark and desperate. Fighting between the Flood and Covenant takes place in every room, and the Prophet of Truth attempts to bring comfort to the Covenant, but to no avail. Flood spores fill the air, darkening the environment, and globs of flood growth begin taking over the massive city. The Gravemind speaks in a thundering voice, counteracting the optimism of the Prophet of Truth. One moment I like is when Truth lies to the Covenant, saying that noble mercy is here by my side, only for the Gravemind to say, "We exist together now, two corpses in one grave." For the Covenant remaining in this city, this must have been absolutely horrifying to experience. The dark tone and atmosphere of this level is the best part of High Charity. While the story and atmosphere of this mission is great, the level design is lacking. Areas are reused from Gravemind which were already reused in that mission, so this level feels even more repetitive. The difference, of course, is that we're fighting the Flood as well, and that difference is just enough to keep things interesting. Unfortunately, this giant room can be pretty frustrating to fight in, as the limited space makes it difficult to deal with the Flood and drones on higher difficulties. Thankfully, High Charity is pretty short and you can breeze through it pretty quickly if you have the right weapons. I'm not a huge fan of this mission, and it used to be my least favorite, but I've grown to appreciate the environmental storytelling on display here. Overall, High Charity is going in the C tier. It isn't as frustrating as the other Flood-centered missions in this game, and it has more variety in the enemies than Sacred Icon or Quarantine Zone. Its short length makes it more bearable, and it does provide some interesting environments to fight in. I feel comfortable putting it in the middle tier. Where would you put High Charity? Level 13, The Great Journey. At the beginning of this mission, the Arbiter and the Spec Ops commander lament the fates of their fallen brothers. The Arbiter remembers his mission and asks the commander for his help to get inside the control room. The commander tells the Arbiter to mount up and follow him. Claire takes a Wraith and follows the commander back to a parked Scarab, but we discover that Sergeant Johnson has already commandeered it. Johnson makes an agreement with the Arbiter to work together to stop Tartarus from activating the ring and killing us all. For the first time, humans and elites have combined forces. The Arbiter and Johnson make their way to the control room where Tartarus is attempting to force Commander Keyes to use the index to activate Halo. Arbiter attempts to make Tartarus see reason, and Guilty Spark reveals the fate of the Foreigners, destroyed by their own weapons of mass destruction. Arbiter tells Tartarus that the Prophets have betrayed them, but the ever-faithful Brute doubles down on the lies and forces the activation of the ring. After an intense fight, the Chieftain is slain, and Commander Keyes abruptly stops the ring from firing, which forces it and all the other rings to go into standby mode. Guilty Spark states that all rings can be activated remotely from the Ark, and the Arbiter asks where the Ark is. The scene cuts to the Prophet of Truth's ship entering Earth space, and the Chief makes contact with Lord Hood on the Cairo Station. Hood asks Chief why he's here, and the game ends on a cliffhanger with the iconic lines, "Sir, finishing this fight." The Great Journey has the classic Halo tone of badassery throughout. The music in the section where you free Covenant prisoners to fight back against the Brutes is so good, and the pulsing beat keeps you hyped for the upcoming battles. The music in the Banshee section is great and exciting too. The fights are epic and climactic, and the final cutscene leaves the player so excited for the next game. What else can I say about this mission's tone? It's awesome. The opening of the Great Journey is literally a blast, as the player uses a Wraith to break through to the parked Scarab. The next area is awesome and so memorable because of two sections. First, you get to fight alongside Hunters for the first time in any Halo game, and seeing their massive firepower on your side is so cathartic. Then, a few rooms later, you have this epic fight where you can choose to take on a large group of Brutes and Jackals on your own, or you can free the trapped Hunters and Elites to get their help. This indoor section is one of my favorite parts of the game because of the allies you have on your side. The Banshee section that follows is less fun, however. On higher difficulties, the dogfights with Banshees can be extremely frustrating, and I will often just fly past everything because I know the Scarab can catch up without taking any damage. This is the only part of the level I dislike, but thankfully it's pretty short. The last indoor area before the final fight is entertaining, with these areas under the floor that you can use to take cover. Of course, you can skip this fight if you use the active camo, but I like doing the fight. It's challenging on higher difficulties, but it's rewarding to deal with one last large squad of Brutes before the finale. The final boss fight is pretty fun, but it can be annoying sometimes. Normally you have to wait for Sergeant Johnson to fire at Tartarus to lower his shield, but if you bring a beam rifle into the fight, you can lower his shield yourself. It's a game of cat and mouse, waiting for his shield to lower, then dealing as much damage as possible before it powers up again. Of all the boss fights in the game, this is the best one, but it's still not amazing. Tartarus can get stuck on some of the geometry out of range of Johnson's shots, and it stops the fight dead. I always try to keep him in the central area because that's where Johnson has the best shot at him. The brutes that enter the fight can catch you off guard if you're not ready, so make sure to have a carbine or something to deal with them effectively. Once the big brute finally falls, you're done. Overall, the Great Journey is one of my favorite missions in Halo 2, but it does have some frustrating moments. The Banshee section is mediocre, and the Tartarus boss fight can be underwhelming, so I think this mission should go in A tier. What do you think? Should I have put it in S tier? Let me know in the comments. How would you rank the missions in Halo 2? Are there any placements that you disagree with? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this far. Like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed, and please stay tuned for my analysis of the missions in Halo 3. Peace out for now.